Picture a king in the 18th century, right? He wants to fight a war, so he opens up his treasury, pulls out a pile of gold, and essentially just rents an army of mercenaries.
Right. Purely transactional.
Exactly. I mean, they fight, they get paid, they go home. It's that simple. Now, fast forward to today. Picture a suburban dad walking through a shopping mall. He's carrying a baby, but his diaper bag is covered in, like, military-grade webbing, tactical zippers, and morale patches.
Yeah, it looks like it was designed for a combat drop in Fallujah, not, a trip to the food court.
Right. So welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to explore this fundamental shift in human society. We are tracing a wild historical loop to figure out who fights our wars, who holds the weapons, and how the answers to those questions actually shape our culture, our markets, and even our personal identities.
And we've got a fantastic stack of sources for this. We're looking at academic research from Deborah Avant on that historical shift away from mercenaries, a really fascinating breakdown by Terence Witkowski on the modern tactical lifestyle, and Christopher Spearin's analysis of how elite special operations forces are currently losing manpower to private security.
It's a huge topic. And the hook here is that we went from kings hiring private mercenaries to the invention of the patriotic citizen soldier right up to today, where civilians buy tactical diaper bags and elite soldiers leave the military to become private contractors. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, it's a jarring contrast when you put those images side by side.
It really is. And to help you, the listener, really understand the invisible forces shaping the products you see every day, we have to go back to the French Revolution. We need to look at the birth of what we call the citizen soldier.
Which requires a pretty big mindset shift, because like you said, in the 18th century, mercenaries were just standard operating procedure. If you had money, you bought manpower. The soldiers didn't care about your kingdom's politics. But by the 19th century, that practice basically goes entirely out of style. The idea of the citizen army, everyday people fighting for their own nation, completely takes over.
And the catalyst for that was the Enlightenment, wasn't it?
Exactly. You have these philosophers pushing concepts like reason and merit, but most importantly, the social contract.
Right, the idea that sovereignty rests in the people.
Yes. And the logic there is very elegant. If sovereignty isn't just held by a divinely appointed king anymore, but by the people themselves, then defending that sovereignty becomes an obligation held by everyone. It transforms from the king's war into the nation's war.
But France didn't just wake up enlightened one day and change their army. It took an exogenous shock. They lost the 7 Years' War.
Nothing forces institutional change quite like a catastrophic military defeat. It totally shatters the status quo.
So the French aristocracy looked at their military after that loss and realized they needed a major overhaul. But the research points out that the aristocracy wasn't this unified group at all.
No, not at all. They were incredibly fragmented. You had the old-line nobles, the newly rich commercial families buying their way in, the rural landowners. They couldn't agree on much.
And because they were so divided, military reformers were actually able to slip in these highly technical changes, like they standardized artillery calibers, created flexible divisional structures, improved battlefield mapping.
Yeah, and the aristocracy allowed those reforms because they didn't threaten the one thing the elites all cared about.
Keeping their jobs in the officer corps.
Right. As long as the generals were still upper-class elites, they didn't care if the cannons were suddenly uniform. They kept their monopoly on leadership.
Up until 1789, anyway.
Yes. Then the French Revolution hits, and all those old constraints are just blown away. The National Assembly declares that preserving the rights of man requires a public force. So they radically democratize the officer corps, promoting based on skill, not bloodline.
And then comes the big one, the levée en masse.
Conscription.
Right. They start drafting unmarried men between 18 and 25. The whole nation is mobilized. And this triggers a huge debate in academic circles about why this specific model actually caught on globally. Because realistically, a well-funded mercenary army could still win wars.
Oh, the debate gets incredibly rich here. You have political science realists arguing that mass citizen armies were just functionally better, bigger, more reliable.
Yeah.
Then sociologists argue it was actually an ideational shift based on state identity. If the state is the people, the army has to be the people.
But the author of our source text, Deborah Avant, argues it was actually driven by domestic politics and this concept called path dependency. And she brings up this fascinating point about the French army's legendary spirit.
Ah, yes. The myth-making.
Right. We always hear about the incredible motivation of the French Revolutionary armies fighting for liberty. But the historian T.C.W. Blanning points out that a huge part of their success was actually because the French state was completely bankrupt.
I mean, it sounds paradoxical, right? Their poverty made them more lethal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because traditional professional armies relied on these massive, slow-moving supply trains,
Well,
wagons of bread and ammo tying them to roads. The French literally couldn't afford that,
so they were forced to live off the land, scavenge, forage, and move incredibly fast.
which gave them unprecedented flexibility on the battlefield.
Hmm.
So I was thinking about this like an analogy. The old mercenary system is like the big economy, right?
Okay, yeah.
Kings just hired independent contractors. Then the shift to a citizen army is like a company moving to an employee-owned co-op. Everyone suddenly has stock in the country. But if the French just got lucky because they were too broke to afford wagons, did all of Europe adopt this citizen army model based on a total misunderstanding?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the perception of why they won ended up mattering way more than the logistical reality. And Napoleon Bonaparte was a master at exploiting that.
The ultimate PR guy.
Absolutely. He knew his political legitimacy rested on military success, so he leaned heavily into this myth of the patriotic citizen soldier. The Battle of Marengo is the perfect example.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
Right. So at Marengo, one of his top commanders, General Desaix, is killed. Napoleon later claims in official dispatches, which were essentially the mass media of the day, that Desaix died in the arms of his aide, delivering this incredibly poetic final speech about sacrificing himself for the Republic and for posterity.
It's like something straight out of a Hollywood movie.
Except eyewitnesses reported that Desaix was shot in the chest and died instantly. He didn't say a single word.
He literally planted fake quotes in the news. He constructed this romantic spirit of the citizen soldier to sell his wars.
Yes, he created what political scientists call a focal point. He convinced the rest of the world that citizen armies were inherently superior because of their spirit, and that PR spin was so effective that when France's rivals suffered massive defeats, they didn't look at French logistics, they looked at the French spirit.
Which brings us to the Prussians.
The ultimate copycats.
Right, because Prussia suffered humiliating defeats at Jena and Auerstadt in 1806. It nearly collapsed their whole state. So they had their own massive shock to the system.
And they had a massive internal fight about how to interpret that loss.
Because the conservatives just blamed bad management.
Yeah. The conservative military old guard looked at the slaughter and blamed the Duke of Brunswick for being too cautious. They blamed King Frederick William III for refusing to use spies, so they had zero intelligence.
Which, I mean, is a completely logical takeaway. If your CEO makes terrible decisions, you don't burn down the whole company. You fire the CEO and hire better analysts.
Exactly. They argued Prussia didn't need a massive citizen army. They just needed better generals and a highly trained, small, professional force, which could absolutely include mercenaries.
But the reformers, like Scharnhorst, seized on the crisis to push a much larger political agenda. They said, no, we lost because the French have the unbreakable spirit of the citizen soldier. And here's where it gets brilliant. They tied military reform directly to constitutional reform.
Right. They told the king, if you want the peasants to fight like the French, you have to treat them like citizens. They used the military crisis to push for the abolition of serfdom.
And the king agreed. They established universal military obligation. And when Prussia actually used this new citizen army to beat France in 1813, that was it. The debate was settled.
And that's path dependency in action. An initial outcome gets locked in as common sense. If Prussia had listened to the conservatives, kept a small professional army, and still won in 1813, world history and modern democracies would look completely different.
Just imagine how different our society would be if serving in the military wasn't fundamentally tied to your citizenship. Because here's where it gets really interesting. The British literally resisted the citizen army because they were terrified of an armed populace.
Yeah, the British case is fascinating. They suffered a shock too. They lost the American Revolution, but they didn't reform their military model. Why? Because their domestic politics were different. The British elites were haunted by the memory of Oliver Cromwell.
Ah, right. During the English Civil War, Cromwell's forces basically functioned as an armed, politicized populace that overthrew the monarchy.
Exactly. So when the British Parliament looked at the French levée en masse, they didn't see glorious patriots. They saw an armed mob that could turn around and overthrow Parliament.
So to keep control, they maintained this wild system of purchasing officer commissions. You literally bought your rank.
Thousands of pounds for a captaincy. It seems absurd today.
But from their perspective, it was a brilliantly cynical mechanism of civilian control, wasn't it?
Completely. It ensured the military was led exclusively by wealthy gentlemen who had a huge economic stake in the stability of the country. They trusted rich, landed officers not to overthrow the government because they were the government.
And because of that fear, Britain kept using mercenaries well into the 19th century. During the Peninsular War, the Crimean War in the 1850s, they were still hiring German, Swiss, and Italian soldiers.
They only finally reformed in the 1870s with the Cardwell reforms because the Prussian model had just become too incredibly prestigious to ignore.
Okay, so the 19th century firmly establishes that citizens should be soldiers. It locks in globally. But if we fast forward to the 21st century, we see this fascinating inversion. Citizens who are not in the military are paying good money to look and act like they are.
Right. We transition from the battlefields of Europe to the American marketplace, and we have to look at the marketing of the tactical citizen.
Yeah, let's talk about Terence Witkowski's research here. He tracks this massive shift from what he calls gun culture 1.0, which was all about recreation and hunting, to gun culture 2.0, which is entirely focused on armed self-defense.
And with that mindset shift comes a massive aesthetic shift, the rise of the black guns.
Right. Moving away from wood stocks and blued steel to lightweight metal alloys and polymer plastics. We're talking AR-15 style assault rifles, tactical shotguns, and Glock handguns.
Which is funny because traditional hunters originally hated them.
Oh, I know. In 1981, they mocked them as remnants from an erector set they called Glocks Tupperware guns.
But those plastics actually allowed for new futuristic forms. You can mold in accessory rails like Picatinny rails. Suddenly you can attach lasers, high-powered flashlights, advanced scopes, and crucially, it allowed for much higher capacity magazines.
Yeah, a huge difference in capability. But the industry didn't back down from the criticism. They just rebranded. Yeah. Around 2009, industry groups started calling these AR-15 style weapons modern sporting rifles to soften the image. And then the NRA leaned in the other direction and explicitly called the AR-15 America's rifle.
It's a brilliant rhetorical move, tying the weapon directly to patriotism.
The ghost of Napoleon's PR strikes again. But it's not just the guns, it's the fashion. We are talking about 5.11 tactical cargo pants, plate carriers, which were basically bulletproof vests sold to everyday civilians.
And the adaptation for the female demographic is huge.
Oh yeah, Dean Adams selling platinum-colored concealed carry activewear bras and tank corsets and tactical baby gear. Their literal slogan is God, Guns, and Diapers. Tactical diaper bags covered in military webbing. The military aesthetic has been fully commodified.
And this raises an important question, though. What is the actual mindset being sold here? Look at 5.11 tactical slogan, always be ready.
It sounds like the Boy Scout motto.
It echoes it, but in a much more extreme, combat-oriented context. The marketing explicitly states the world is full of unknowns, it's inherently dangerous, and you must be constantly vigilant. It fosters this worldview of extreme self-reliance bordering on paranoia.
You're buying into the identity of a sheepdog protecting the flock. But this isn't just happening organically. This massive marketing ecosystem is supercharged by very real political and legal forces.
Right. And before we dig into those specifics, we need to frame this objectively.
Yes. A quick impartiality check for you, our listener. We are not taking political sides on gun control or the Second Amendment here. We are strictly, impartially reporting the facts exactly as they are laid out in the academic source text. We're just conveying how these legislative acts and political advertisements were utilized as highly effective marketing tools that drove up sales and cemented this tactical lifestyle.
With that said, the research identifies three major political catalysts. The first was the expiration of the 1994 federal assault weapons ban in 2004.
The floodgates opened.
Exactly. Manufacturers rushed to bring heavily accessorized versions of these rifles to the civilian market. The second catalyst in 2005 was the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or PLCAA.
Which was a massive legislative shield. It protected gun makers from liability when crimes were committed with their products.
Right. And from a business perspective, if you remove the threat of crippling lawsuits, you give the industry a green light to market their products much more aggressively, focusing on lethality without fear of legal reprisal.
And the third catalyst is the 1033 program.
Yeah, that allowed the Department of Defense to transfer excess military gear, armored vehicles, M16s, body armor directly to local police departments.
Right, militarizing domestic law enforcement, which normalizes the tactical aesthetic for civilians. You see a cop on your corner looking like a soldier, it makes you want that same gear for your own home, and the sales numbers just exploded.
Yeah.
FBI background checks jumped from around 9 million in 1999 to nearly 40 million in 2020.
The growth is exponential. And as the market grew, political signaling became incredibly overt. The text highlights politicians like Representative Thomas Massey and Representative Lauren Boebert posting family Christmas cards holding M60 machine guns and Uzis.
Yeah, the intertextual message is wild. It's a highly potent marketing tool for a specific ideological stance. But the text also highlights a really profound duality in all of this, right?
It does. On one hand, consumers report gaining a real sense of empowerment, family defense, and physical challenge. It provides a real sense of community.
But on the other hand, the text explicitly notes severe societal risks. When you provision society with this paranoid ideology and high-capacity weaponry, it has enabled mentally disturbed individuals to carry out horrific mass shootings. The text references Sandy Hook, Pulse, and Las Vegas.
It's an undeniable and very difficult tension.
And what's fascinating is the demographic shift. Of the millions of new gun owners during the 2020 pandemic surge, about half were women, 20% were Black, and 20% Hispanic.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? The tactical lifestyle isn't just a niche subculture anymore. It's a massive, expanding consumer identity.
Absolutely.
But while everyday citizens are dressing up like elite military operators, the actual elite military operators are increasingly leaving the state to become private citizens, specifically private security contractors.
Yeah.
We are returning to the age of the mercenary.
Which completes our historical loop. To understand this, we have to define how Special Operations Forces, or SOF, differ from conventional forces.
Right. Conventional forces are what scholars call a Baroque arsenal.
Yes, they are capital-intensive, built around massive platforms like aircraft carriers and fleets of tanks. The human soldier just operates the machine.
But SOS operates on inverted principles. Their tenets are quality is better than quantity, and humans are more important than hardware.
The elite operator is the weapon, and because of that, they cannot be mass-produced.
And private security companies, or PSCs, operate on those exact same principles. They don't buy fighter jets, they sell elite human capital.
And they get that capital straight from the government. The research calls it a parentage link. PSCs heavily recruit from, or are founded by, retired SOF. WatchGuard International was founded by David Sterling, the guy who founded the British S. Triple Canopy draws from Delta Force. Trident Group from Navy SEALs.
This is like a government space agency spending a decade training a genius astronaut. Zero-G training, astrophysics. And the day they are ready to fly, a private tech billionaire swoops in, doubles their salary, and hires them away. The state is essentially subsidizing the R&D for private mercenary firms.
It's a massive transfer of public investment into private profit. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally challenges Max Weber's definition of the state.
Right, Weber said the state must hold a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence.
Exactly. But these private companies fracture that monopoly. They're renting out the state's most highly trained instruments of violence on the free market.
But they don't call themselves mercenaries, do they?
Oh, they despise that word. It carries centuries of stigma, so they use their SOF pedigree to dodge the pejorative label. Triple Canopy actually trademarked the slogan, "Quiet professionals, still serving." They wrap themselves in patriotic professionalism.
And it works. The text mentions Maersk is called the Tiffany of shipping companies, specifically because they only hire former Navy SEALs for security. But this creates a massive headache for the military. How does the state maintain its elite forces when the private sector pays better?
USOCOM recognizes this. They want to build a global SOF network that includes these private companies, but there are major frictions.
Yeah, let's break those down. First is territorial control.
Right. SOF seeks to aggressively control or deny space. They go on the offensive. PSCs, however, are strictly defensive. They create a Swiss cheese approach to security.
Ah, meaning they only protect the specific compound of the corporate client who pays them, the solid part of the cheese, and completely ignore the local population, the holes.
Exactly. Their strategic goals simply do not align. The second fiction involves NGOs, like Doctors Without Borders. PSCs desperately want NGOs as clients to boost their legitimacy. It gives them a humanitarian alibi.
But NGOs resist that, right?
Yeah.
Because associating with armed contractors destroys their own neutrality.
Exactly. It makes them targets. And the third, most critical friction is the manpower drain. Since 2001, USOCOM doubled in size, but overseas deployments quadrupled. The military is facing severe burnout.
And because SOF can't be mass-produced, losing guys to PSCs is a zero-sum game. To stop the bleeding, states have had to act like competing corporations, offering massive pay bumps. The UK gave the SAS a 50% pay increase in 2006 just to retain talent.
Right.
But wait, if the state has to use financial bonuses to bribe its own citizens to stay in the army instead of going private, haven't we just circled all the way back to the 18th century mercenary system we talked about at the very beginning?
The expert consensus synthesizes this beautifully. The profit motive never aligns 100% with the public interest. PSCs might look like SOF and train like SOF, but their ultimate loyalty is to the shareholder, not the state.
Wow. We have traced an incredible journey today. We saw how the Enlightenment and Napoleon's PR machine convinced the world to abandon mercenaries for citizen armies. We explored how today's civilians are buying into the tactical lifestyle, turning military aesthetics into consumer goods. And finally, we saw how the most elite citizen soldiers are leaving the state to become highly paid private contractors, bringing the concept of the mercenary right back into the mainstream.
The lines are constantly shifting.
They really are. The next time you see a tactical backpack at the airport or read a news story about military contractors, you will understand the deep, centuries-long tug-of-war between the state, the citizen, and the market.
The invisible history is everywhere.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. If everyday citizens continue to arm themselves with military-grade tactical gear, and the state increasingly relies on private, for-profit corporations for its most elite security needs, will the traditional national army eventually become obsolete? Are we witnessing the slow unraveling of the state's monopoly on violence, destined to return to a modern, high-tech version of feudalism where security belongs only to those who can afford to buy it? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll see you next time.